Not long ago, I read 3 statements within a period of 3 days about what was happening in education. Had they come to my mind individually, I might not have noticed them, but since they came within a period of 1 week in 2 or 3 different publications, they screamed out at me as to what was happening in education today. The first statement was written by a man named Alan Bloom, who teaches at the University of Chicago. He wrote in his bestseller, The Closing of the American Mind, these words. He describes the muddle we're in education in these terms. He said, "The most important and most astonishing phenomenon of our time, all the more astonishing in being almost unnoticed by us, is that there is now an entirely new language of good and evil originating in an attempt to get beyond good and evil and thus preventing us today from even talking with any conviction about good and evil anymore. We are teaching our children in a morally neutral environment, but it is not morally neutral, it is morally evil." Leo Buscaglia, who does not claim to be an evangelical and perhaps himself may be a New Ager. In fact, if you've read some of his books, they're very affirming, but he admits to being involved in an Eastern religion of some type, although I don't know which one it is. He has written a book on love, and in the book he describes the average student who graduates. Then he describes the ones who taught the students, and he's speaking here of college education. And he writes, "So the individual now fully grown leaves our schools confused, lonely, alienated, lost, angry, and with a mind full of isolated, meaningless facts which we laughingly call an education. He knows neither who he is, where he is, or how he got there. He has no idea of where he's going, how to arrive there, or what he will do if he gets there. He has no idea of what he is, what he wants, or how to develop it. In essence, he is a type of robot, old before his time, living in the past, confused by the present, frightened by the future, and just like the teachers who made him." End of quote. A man by the name of Tal Brook publishes a magazine or a monthly newspaper called the Omega Letter. He wrote these words about high school graduates. He said, "High school grads come out semi-literate, passive, hedonistic, as they live for the moment, have no goals, no concept of history, no discipline, no real mental furniture, no sense of what is noble and good. Instead, they specialize in taboo-breaking decadence and grin cynically at moral correctives. They have earned self-esteem cheaply by being told that they are gods. Now they don't have a thing to prove, nor are they capable of the sort of commitment and virtue required to run a society, whether in the workplace or in human relationships. They are ready to fall into the hands of almost anyone who comes along. They have become the less than zero generation, dropping by the wayside on cocaine and perversion, yet they have been assured by educators of their own self-worth and freedom to self-actualize as long as it feels good. They have tried that, and they have emerged impoverished both intellectually and morally. They have empty heads and hard hearts, and the self that they have spent so much time pursuing vanishes like a ghost every time they think they have found it." End of quote. Those are hard words to describe the end product of our current educational concerns. Obviously, what we're talking about has to do with the New Age influence, but these two things are not incidental. Most of us remember when the occupation with self-esteem began to take over our culture. Obviously, because California is always way ahead of everything else, we have led the way in introducing the concepts of self-esteem into modern education. I was surprised, as perhaps some of you were who read the U.S. News and World Report. There was a full-blown article by an educator, the education editor of the magazine, and the article was entitled "The Trouble with Self-Esteem." And that full-page article on the problems with self-esteem documented that now, after all of this infusion of teaching on self-esteem, educators have gone back and discovered through their study that the indoctrination with self-esteem has not helped education, it actually has hindered it. It has made everyone accepted regardless of accomplishment. It has removed motivation from the classroom. It has de-emphasized the importance of achievement. And the result of that is that we are now further behind in our desire to attain educationally, even though we're going around patting everybody on the back and telling each other we're all pretty good, that we are self-affirming, and that there's no reason for us to be concerned. Self-esteem was the door through which the New Age movement walked into our classrooms, and now it is no longer even subtly practiced. In a California town, a third grader pressed his fingers against his temples, shut his eyes tight, and wrinkled his face in intense concentration. He was trying to read the symbols touched by the teacher's assistant seated on the other side of a large partition. On the reading instructor's desk lay a book entitled ESP, end of quote. 300 teachers and school employees in San Jose, California, gathered to improve education with workshops and lectures on communications, relaxation, and self-esteem. One group sat cross-legged in a darkened classroom learning how to reduce stress with yoga. In the next room, another group meditated behind closed doors. The third graders concentrated intently, their little eyes squeezed tightly, their small brows furrowed. You could almost hear them thinking, I wish I may, I wish I might. But the power of imagination being employed had nothing to do with standard nursery rhyme fare. These diminutive students were on a journey of the mind to inhabit their negative behavior. The teacher had told them to imagine tiny vultures living inside them. If they lost emotional control and were bad, the vultures would grow. If they learned to minimize conflicts with their fellow students, the vultures would diminish. Innocuously called an autonomous learner model, the course had been developed as a New Age adjunct for children, teaching youngsters the mind power to create reality. Instead, it created a furor among the parents whose children were enrolled in that class. One mother reported her daughter couldn't sleep at night because she feared vultures were flying around in her room. Another parent declared that her son was imagining all kinds of monsters for the purpose of punishing his friends that he didn't like. Johanna Michelson has written a book on the New Age movement. In fact, she's quite an expert on the influence of the New Age movement with children. She is an authority on the New Age movement, and I recommend her books very highly. She wrote in one of her books, Lambs to the Slaughter, these words. She said, in growing numbers, our schools around the country, the children are being taught how to contact their spirit guides, euphemistically called their higher self or their inner wisdom, to help them solve problems. They are being taught yoga and meditation and techniques of guided imagery, visualization, long used by shamans, mediums, and other occultists in their practice of religion. 25 first graders lie in motionless silence on the classroom floor. The teacher intones soothing phrases to aid relaxation. Within moments, the meditative journey begins. The children imagine the sun. They are told to bring the sun down from the sky and into their body until their bodies are ablaze with light. Recently, one of the women in our church came up to me and handed me an entire envelope full of material. In the envelope was a letter which I'd like to quote in part. She said, Dear Pastor Jeremiah, before becoming a Christian, I spent 10 years of my life studying and reading New Age material. Some of these people I read about include Edgar Cayce, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Ruth Montgomery, and all of Shirley MacLaine's books. Because of all the confusion I experienced from reading these various books, I feel very strongly that today as Christians we need to speak out against them and any other New Age philosophy. The information I have included in this envelope all came from my 9-year-old's GATE classroom. The word GATE means Gifted and Talented Education, G-A-T-E. And it was a stack like this. It took me a long time to read through all of it. And as I did, I can just summarize what I found. As I looked through the material she gave me, here are some of the things I discovered. In a handout that was presented to the parents of gifted children, there were references to the brain as made up of 100 to 200 billion cells, each ready to be used for actualizing the highest levels of human potential. There was a detailed paragraph on the virtues of biofeedback as a legitimate technique for attaining altered consciousness. There was a table of characteristics of gifted children that described them as capable and concerned with metaphysical ideas and phenomena, also open to psychic experiences. In other words, if you want to find out what gifted children are like, here are some of the ways you can find them out. And some of the characteristics were that they were very into metaphysical things and very capable of psychic experiences. There were quotes from New Age physicist Fritjof Capra and psychologist Carl Jung. There was a list of activities which supposedly made up the integration of the intellectual process, and included on the list were relaxation and centering, which is the ability to focus brainwave energy and imagery. The table of contents of one of the books showed references to one-eyed people, which has to do with the third eye, positive references to Buddha, supportive references to evil spirits, and sexual statements that were hard to believe that a 9-year-old should even be reading. I think the thing that was most disturbing was a spelling game that was included in a printed handout sheet that was given to the third graders. The spelling game was encouraging students to become good spellers and made up 8 levels of spelling power. And as you were able to spell better, you were able to move up in the levels. Let me tell you what the levels were. Level 1, humans. Those are just average people. Level 2, swordsmen. Level 3, warriors. Level 4, elders. The description of the elders matches that of ascended masters. Level 5, enchanters, and I quote, "Short, fun-loving little creatures who love to sing, dance, and eat. They have witchcraft powers and the ability to find gold and other treasures." Level 6, sorcerers. Good singers who love people, most valuable for their ability to cast spells. They can talk to animals and can lead their group over fire and water. Level 7, magician. Noted for skill with magic, somewhat shy, cute, and cuddly. Number 8, and the highest level of spelling, wizards. Highest level you can achieve with the extreme power of the good guys, can cast the power of exchange, and extremely intelligent, agile, and handsome. Now all of those people, wizards, magicians, sorcerers, enchanters, and ascended masters, are just terms right out of the New Age handbook, but what they have done is they've made them friendly terms, and they have gathered around them warm and fuzzy words to make them very acceptable, and they have taught 9-year-old students all of the vocabulary of the New Age movement. And that's in a public school in Ramona. An educator who is a consultant by the name of Deborah Rosman trains elementary teachers. She has written a book called Meditating with Children. In her book, she thanks the universal mother of compassion found in all of nature, and Paramadansa Yogananda. She dedicates the book to all children everywhere that they may evolve toward their spiritual destiny. Rosman's meditations delight teachers, quiet children, and invoke a dangerous spiritual energy. They straighten their backs so the energy from the source within can flow up our spine into our brain. The teacher then is supposed to lead the children in a visualization exercise. One begins this way. Sitting very still with eyes closed, imagine that you are floating out of your spiritual eye and into the leaf of the plant. Feel the oneness of the source of all life everywhere. That's in the book. Or she may use the visualization like this. Meditate and go into the source within, and in that one source, feel that you are one with everyone else's light, intelligence, love, and power. Chant Om, O-M, which is the chant, softly to fill the whole circle and the whole room with your experience of the light within. That is raw Hinduism. That is beyond the New Age movement, and that is in a book that is being used to train educators today so that they can deal with the frustrations of children and cause them to relax, supposedly for a better learning environment. Now, these programs that I have illustrated with all of these various quotations are called confluent or holistic education. Whenever you see the term confluent education, you're dealing with New Age education. Sometimes it is referred to as personal psychology, effective education, and even sometimes it is put under the guise of accelerated learning. The guru of all of this, the great architect of New Age education, is Beverly Galion, described as the architect of all New Age educational thought. She believes it's the holistic approach to thinking. In an interview with religion researcher Frances Adney in 1980, Galion summed up her beliefs, quote, "Once we begin to see that we are all God, that we all have the attributes of God, then I think the whole purpose of human life is to re-own the God-likeness within us, the perfect love, the perfect wisdom, the perfect understanding, the perfect intelligence. And when we do that, we create back to that essential oneness, which is consciousness. Beverly Galion developed 3 programs which are federally funded in education for the Los Angeles public schools. Those programs, funded by the government, use guided imagery and meditation. She has been the one who, more than anyone else, has influenced education along New Age lines. When you see her name, you know you are at the heart of New Age education. Galion's suggestions to educators call for them to inculcate in our children the belief that we are all God, that we have the attributes of God. But in order to get that belief into our classroom without arousing the hackles of Christian parents who might object, Dr. Galion advised discretion. She said, don't reveal our intentions. For example, when a teacher leads children into a group meditation exercise in which they visualize and make contact with demon guides, the teachers are to describe such guides as imaginary guides or wise persons, so that they don't use the touch terms that will raise concern on the part of the parents. These are all things that are happening in elementary and high school education. If time permitted, I would also like to have told you what was going on in college education, but let me just say this, folks. The teachers who are inculcating this stuff into our grade school children and our high school children are being trained somewhere. And they're being trained in the secondary schools of our land. Here in California, we seem to be leading the way in all of this craziness. For instance, Citrus Community College in Azusa, California, gives credit to their students for self-hypnosis classes and parapsychology courses that teach ESP, telepathy, clairvoyance, how to see and interpret auras, how to recognize out-of-body experience, and how to harness the secrets of spoon bending through psychokinesis. You can get college credit for that. There's something very wrong with what's going on in our land today. As we look at all of this, and I have just given you some illustrations, I think I'd like to describe it for you, if I could, in 3 or 4 different ways, and we've tried to do this in each one of these sessions. First of all, I think, men and women, it's important that you understand that New Age education is deliberate. It is deliberate. New Age leaders know that if they're going to bring in the New Age kingdom, it will be necessary to snatch the new generation from their parents. William McLaughlin, a New Age political activist, believes that what he calls the awakening can be accomplished by the 1990s. He said the reason an awakening takes a generation or more to work itself out is that it must grow with the young. It must escape the old ways. Revitalization is growing up around us in our children, who are both more innocent and more knowing than their parents and grandparents. It is their world that is yet to be reborn. In other words, what he's saying is we can't change and transform the generation unless we start with the children and grow it from the bottom up, so that we grow up this education. That's why there's such an emphasis on the small ones and indoctrinating them. In the Lucis Trust, Alice Bailey suggests that New Age disciples work especially hard to impart new consciousness to young people. What must be done, Bailey emphasizes, is to condition the minds of young people, preparing them for the emergence of the new order. Even a brief look at New Age literature will help you understand where they are and what their goals are. For instance, among some recent writings are books like Magical Child, Gift of Unknown Things, Children of the New Age, Celebration of the Child, Nurturing the Child of the Future, and The Conscious Child. Readers are told, for example, that children may have to be encouraged into exploring the new world that awaits them. Marilyn Ferguson suggests that one must not be afraid to upset the learner. Ferguson cites one New Age spiritual teacher who commented, "True compassion is ruthless." In other words, force the children to be as uncomfortable as you want to make them, as long as you get the point across. And men and women, this spine-tingling and scary stuff is going on in our schools right here in this county. Our kids are like some kind of spiritual fodder to the New Agers. They think they should be pushed and mauled and ultimately jammed into a corner, and the truth, which is the Bible, is communicated to them as a lie. They are told the Son of God is a hoax, that Lucifer, the great initiator, is the bright and morning star who is coming soon to restore each of us to wholeness. That's what is behind what is being taught in our schools today. Philip Phillips has stated in his expose of occultic toys and cartoons these words. He said, by the time the child is a teen, unless his parents have instilled Christian values in him, he will have more knowledge of the occult than he will have of God. End of quote. If I had time to go into all that's going on in movies and television and New Age toys, you would understand that our children do know a lot more about the occult than you may think they do. They are being subtly indoctrinated with this information, not just in the schools, but in other places as well. One of the most chilling statements I read in my research for this session was written by John Dunphy, who is an ardent New Ager who confesses a consuming interest in folklore, history, and religion. He wrote for the Humanist magazine an essay entitled A Religion for the New Age. And in that essay, here are his words. I am convinced, he said, that the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classrooms by teachers who correctly perceive their role as the proselytizers of a new faith. A religion of humanity that recognizes and respects the spark of what theologians call divinity in every human being. These teachers must embody the same selfless dedication as the most rabid fundamentalist preachers. The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new. Listen now. The rotting corpse of Christianity, together with all its adjacent evils and misery, and the new faith, resplendent in its promise. End of quote. In other words, he said, the classroom is where we will win the war. We will go into the classroom and with determination, we will destroy Christianity and rear up in its place the deceptive ideology of the New Age movement. The New Age education is planned and determined and disciplined. I want you to notice, secondly, that New Age education is very deceptive. It may be going on where your children go to school and you not even be aware of it. Although schools are openly hostile to any influence of traditional Christianity, they are open, many of them, to New Age viewpoints which pose as non-religious psychological practices. Once again, quoting from New Age activist Dick Sutphin, he makes this general point. He says, one of the biggest advantages that we have as New Agers is once the occult, metaphysical, and New Age terminology is removed, we have concepts and techniques that are very acceptable to the general public. So we can change the names and demonstrate the power. In so doing, we open the door to millions who normally would not be receptive. Jack Canfield and Paula Clinic advise their fellow educators how to present centering, a form of Eastern meditation in the classroom. Quote, centering can also be extended into work with meditation in the classroom. Parentheses, advice. If you're teaching in a public school, don't call it meditation. Call it centering. Every school wants children to be relaxed, attentive, and creative, and that is what they will get. End of parentheses. In other words, change the terminology. Use different terms that won't catch people off guard, but do the same thing under the guise of the new, less offensive terms. Marilyn Ferguson approvingly notes, with such subtle forces at work in education, she says, tens of thousands of classroom teachers, educational consultants and psychologists, counselors, administrators, researchers, and faculty members in colleges of education have been among the millions engaged in personal transformation. They have begun to link regionally and nationally to share strategies, to conspire for the teaching of all they most value: freedom, high expectations, awareness, patterns, connections, creativity, the New Age agenda. Even a tiny minority of committed teachers, counselors, and administrators can set off seismic shocks with programs that work when people don't know what you're up to. End of quote. The New Age education is deceptive. This inoculation against Christianity, together with the dangers of occult practices, calls parents to action. We need to know what schools are teaching our children. Dr. Shirley Correll, herself an educator, shares our concern about the newer forms of education. She describes a program called Quieting Reflex and Success Imagery, which is accepted in their public school. And this is what she says. Trusting children are psychologically manipulated into involvement with spirit guides, Eastern religions, hypnosis, altered states of consciousness, and occult activities forbidden to Christians. In one case, a little girl refused to pray in the name of Jesus after her imaginary wise person or spirit guide directed her not to. Children are often subtly conditioned not to discuss these programs with their parents, and some children are reluctant to admit the programs exist at all because they have been brainwashed into not doing it. Professor Ronald Havelock describes one such situation. In this situation, a girl in his district, a girl by the name of Charlotte, says that the course she attended instructed her on how to sneak in all the mind-bending techniques and humanistic courses and methods without getting caught, and how to identify the resistors in my community. And that was a subtle strategy that was given to the teachers so that they would know how to sneak this stuff in when nobody is watching and when nobody would be on guard. Teachers and educators promoting the New Age world religion are blatantly and without fear slamming Christianity in the classroom, and they are proclaiming the coming of the New Age kingdom. New Age education is not only deliberate, it is deceptive. But thirdly, New Age education is dangerous. Perhaps I should even say deadly. This is not just some different ideology that's going out there in the public classroom, folks. There are major concerns that we ought to be looking into, even in our own community. New Age education is simply Satanism in its more respectable arena. I read this week about a girl named Christine Morales who was so pleased that some classmates from school had invited her to a party. But shortly after this 14-year-old student arrived, she found that no one among the 25 people at the party would talk to her. In fact, they all seemed to be angry with her. Some had a terrible look in their eyes, Christine recalled. Suddenly, a group of girls ran toward her and started punching and beating her up. Surprised and frightened, she cried out to a nearby adult chaperone. The man just looked on, a smirk etched across his face. Christine heard him actually encouraging her attackers to continue beating her. Later, from her hospital room, Christine tearfully explained, "I didn't know they were all Satanists." The young teenager had been beaten because she had refused to become a Satanist and join a devil worship group. And it happened in a party that she went to where she had no idea anything like that was going on. In her book, Child Abuse in the Classroom, Phyllis Schlafly included some letters from parents who stepped forward to complain about the inroads that the New Age movement was making in their classrooms. One of the letters was a tragic letter from a mother who wrote these words, and I quote, "On Labor Day, our son Joe committed suicide. When going through some of his things, I found some papers with notes taken in his psychology class. The notes were about psychic experiences, ESP, psychokinesis, and astral projection. I began to question what was being taught. I then asked my daughter Teresa, who was a junior, to bring home the psychology book from the school. The book was entitled Psychology for You by Saul Gordon. Saul Gordon is a signer of the Second Humanist Manifesto. As I looked through the book, it seemed to be a how-to manual to the occult world. It suggested devising an experiment with a Ouija board on page 234 to 239, explain how to do meditation and TM on page 313 and 314, and on page 320, it tells you how to do yoga. In a psychology book, in a public school, where a young man learned the technique that caused him ultimately to end his life. A mother from Kenosha, Wisconsin, felt the painful effects of what her children were learning in school, and though it wasn't quite as tragic, perhaps it's where most of us would be, and maybe we should sit up and take notice as we think about the danger of New Age education. This mother wrote these words. She said, "By the time my first two children had reached third grade, I realized something was very wrong. The child I took to school in the morning was not the child I picked up after school in the afternoon. If this change had been a positive change reflecting academic progress, I would have been delighted. However, the change I noticed was in their value system. They seemed to be desensitized to the morals I had been trying to instill in them as their mother, and I thought that I had failed. I failed because I had assumed that the schools my children were attending were like the schools I had attended. I found instead that the thrust of schools had turned from education to indoctrination. I found the values I instilled in my children were not reinforced or respected by the schools, but were systematically challenged in the classroom. And my children were becoming something different, and I had no control over it. until I realized what was going on. New Age education is deliberate, it is deceptive, and it is very dangerous.